What's going on, family? I'm Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. 10 of the greatest black light heavyweights include Archie Moore. Now you see Harold Johnson in this video, and I will be discussing him later in this video. I have Harold Johnson, part of the 10 greatest black light heavyweights of all times. But I bring him up now because I want to give you a perspective and an idea of the kind of man and fighter Archie Moore was and what he was up against during his time. Now, Archie Moore would begin boxing in 1935, but it wouldn't be until 1952 where he would get his first shot at a world title. It was against Joey Maxim. Joey Maxim would defeat Sugar Ray Robinson a few months previous. And it wasn't quite a defeat against Ray Robinson of Joey Maxim as it was for the Heat. The fight took place in 1952 at New York's Yankee Stadium. And I had the pleasure of meeting Ruby Goldstein, who was the referee for that fight. And he told me that the heat was unbearable for him. You can only imagine a fighter. He had to be replaced by a hard-punching lightweight in his day. And his name was Ray Miller. And Ray Miller, in his memoir, would state that the conditions were unbearable. It was flies all over the place. It was very muggy in New York at that time. So when Ray Robinson would lose to Joey Maxim, it put Joey Maxim on a different pay scale. Although Ray Robinson was a middleweight, moving up to light heavyweight to take on Joey Maxim. But Maxim was now looked at as a star. So Archie Moore would challenge Joey Maxim. In order to secure the fight, there were some terms and conditions that he had to oblige by. Condition 1, Jack Kearns was the manager for Joey Maxim. Jack Kearns had managed Mickey Walker, and he managed Jack Dempsey, among others. He was always known for wheeling and dealing and playing the con man's game. In 1926, Jack Kearns would get a fight with Mickey Walker to fight the middleweight champion of the world, Theodore Tiger Flowers. The fight took place in Chicago. And Al Capone was an associate of Jack Kearns. And although Theodore Tiger Flowers would defeat Mickey Walker, and onlookers were furious at the decision, the verdict would go to Mickey Walker. So Jack Kearns showed Archie Moore a contract. And the contract read, and I paraphrase, Joey Maxim had demanded and received $100,000, while Archie Moore would receive $800. Condition 2, Archie Moore had to agree to pay out 10% of his earnings for the remainder of his career to Jack Kearns. Now that reminds me of Joe Louis, who was the second black light heavyweight champion in 1937 when he would defeat Jimmy Braddock at Comiskey Park in Chicago. He had to sign an agreement as well to Jimmy Braddock that he would pay out 10% of his earnings to Jimmy Braddock to get that title shot over Max Schmeling. for 10 years, wound up being the remainder of his career. And condition number 3 for Archie Moore was that Jack Kearns had to manage both Joey Maxim and Archie Moore for the remainder of their careers. So you knew that Joey Maxim would get title opportunities as long as Archie Moore had that belt. Now Archie Moore, who was named Ancient Archie, was called the Mongoose by Jack Murphy, and as years went by, Old Archie would be attached. And when you spoke to Archie Moore, according to when you had the conversation with him, the birth dates would change, and how old he was would depend on the moment under the sun. See, Archie Moore would tell you he was born December 13th, 1916 in Benoit, Mississippi. But when you spoke to his mother, who was actually his aunt, Willie Pearl Moore, she would tell you he was born in 1913. And if you asked his uncle Cleveland Moore, he would beg to differ. When Archie Moore was young, he would get into trouble. At the age of 7, he would have his first encounter. He would steal car radios and things of that nature. But he would get into street fights. And he was pretty good with his hands as a young man. So he met a gentleman by the name of Felix Thurman. He would take him to San Diego in 1937 to keep him out of trouble and to find a better way of Archie Moore to burn off his energy. The first promoter that Archie Moore would have would be a promoter from San Diego. His name was Lynn Platner. And Lynn Platner would host some of the biggest fighters in San Diego at that time. And the Hughes twins were big names during those years. Big Boy and Shorty Hughes. Archie Moore would fight them both. And he would take on the Hughes brothers several times during the course of his career. Began boxing at the age of 18, Archie Moore would tell you 19. He loved Kid Chocolate, as well as Jack Johnson. But he would spar with the legendary Henry Armstrong, as those two men would travel the same circuits in San Diego. Now, Archie Moore would have surgery on his stomach. He would have a stomach ulcer, 1941. And according to the reports, Archie Moore would die on the table. And according to Archie Moore, he would speak to himself in a subliminal way. I cannot die. I must arise. And 10 seconds later, once again, according to Archie Moore, he would come through. Archie Moore would have an L-shaped scar on his stomach because of that surgery. But after 1 year of rehab, he would jump back on his horse. He died December 9th, 1998, San Diego, California. It basically tore me apart because of the relationship. I met Archie Moore about 7 separate occasions, and each time was genuine. We would have long conversations about boxing, about his career, about his life, about the fights with him and Charlie Burley, and Ezard Charles, and Harold Johnson, and Holman Williams. He told me about Kid Chocolate, discussed Ray Robinson and Joe Louis. Obviously, he talked to me about George Foreman. But I wanted to know more about the early days. And I'll share those early days through his records as we talk more, no pun intended, about this great fighter. Archie Moore stood 5'11". He had a 75-inch reach. He was a light heavyweight who fought from 1935 to 1963. And he would box 1,472 rounds with a 60% knockout ratio. Being in the ring with fighters such as Curtis the Hatchet Man Shepard, who he stated was just about the hardest puncher he would ever be in the ring with. Even more so than Rocky Marciano, 1955. Archie Moore would state that he fought some of the greatest fighters of his time. I do not beg to differ. He was in the ring with Charlie Doc Williams. September 9th, 1937, he would defeat Sammy Slaughter. He would take on Leonard Marrow and Jimmy Bivens, Oakland Billy Smith, and Burt Lytell. He would train by digging ditches and chopping down wood with his bare hands. And he would dig the dirt out of the dishes 12 feet high into a truck. He would dig those ditches 6 feet underground. And it was no problem getting work because the cemeteries would love free labor. But it was part of the training regiment of the late great Archie Moore. He says it would strengthen his forearms, make his shoulders and arms tolerate pain. He would take on young Gene Buffalo and Charlie Burley. Charlie Burley would take on Ezzy Charles 2 times, May 25th and June 29th of 1942. Archie Moore would tell you that Charlie Burley was the greatest fighter he laid his eyes on. And when asked, would Charlie Burley defeat Ray Robinson, Archie Moore stated, it is a very strong possibility. Archie Moore would take on Tiger Ted Laurie, Burt Lytell twice, Oakland Billy Smith twice, and Little Tiger Aaron Wade, Chuck Higgins, and Holman Williams, Coco Kid, Tommy Hurricane Jackson. Now, Ezzy Charles, Cincinnati Cobra, talked about him in a previous video. He would take on Archie Moore 3 times. Ezzy Charles had a fighting record of 121 bouts, 95 wins, 25 losses, 52 knockouts. And he would become the NBA World Heavyweight Champion. I'm thinking of Archie Moore as I'm speaking to you. Ezzy Charles would become the NBA Heavyweight Champion when he would defeat Jersey Joe Walcott in 1949. But Ezzy Charles would take on Charlie Burley twice, Tommy Hurricane Jackson, Booker Beckwourth, Joey Maxim, just to name a few. May 5th, 1947, and January 13th, 1948, Archie Moore would take on Ezzy Charles, once at the Music Hall Arena, and the other time at the Cleveland Arena. He would lose both fights. He would take on Joey Maxim, who had a record of 116 total bouts, 83 wins, 29 losses, 22 knockouts. December 17th, 1952. He fought him again June 24th, 1953, and once again, January 27th, 1954. As I stated, Joey Maxim would demand and he would receive $100,000 of that purse. Archie Moore would only receive $800. But he would get the title and hold that title for 10 years. Archie Moore would also take on Ezzy Charles, May 20th, 1946. He would lose in 10 rounds, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He would take on Jimmy Bivens, August 22nd, 1945, the Lakefront Stadium in Cleveland, Ohio. And Jimmy Bivens would be in the ring with Tommy Hurricane Jackson twice, Coley Wallace, Joe Louis, Bob Baker, and Joey Maxim. Archie Moore would also face Carl Bobo Olsen, who was a Hawaiian middleweight. He became middleweight champion in 1953, when Olsen would defeat Randy Turpin. The conditions were When Maxim defeated Ray Robinson in 52, Ray Robinson would relinquish his title and go into show business. So that title would remain vacant. I'm speaking of the middleweight championship crown. So Ray Robinson would suggest that Randy Turpin get a shot. Randy Turpin had to take on Charlie Humms, European middleweight championship. And Carl Bobo Olsen had to take on Patty Young for the America's middleweight championship title. And since Turpin would defeat Humms and Olsen would defeat Young, those two men, Turpin and Olsen, would meet for the vacant middleweight championship title. And what was interesting, when Ray Robinson made a comeback, he would take the title away from Carl Bobo Olsen. But Archie Moore would defeat Carl Bobo Olsen in defense of his light heavyweight championship title. You can't make this stuff up. What an interesting era these men would come up in. Now, as I stated, he would face Harold Johnson 5 times. Harold Johnson would win 1. Archie Moore would win 4 times, excuse me. April 26, 1949. 24-0. They will fight at the Convention Hall. And Archie Moore would win. September 24th, 1951. 33-2, Milwaukee. Archie Moore would lose. January 29th, 1952. 34-3, Toledo, Ohio. Archie Moore would win. August 11th, 1954. 47-5. Archie Moore would win. And that would be the first time he would fight in New York's Madison Square Garden. And he would knock out Harold Johnson. Now let me go back to 1951 for one moment. And I'll talk about this when I bring up another fighter. I'll just tell you, it's Jimmy Bivens. I will be discussing him in the next video. But 1951 was probably one of the worst years for champions because they would all lose their titles. Now, Archie Moore didn't lose his title in 51 because he wasn't champion until 1952. But 51, a lot of great fighters lost. You had Joe Brown, who would lose against the Chocolate Ice Cube, Tommy Campbell, out of California. Ray Robinson would lose to Randy Turpin. Jake LaMotta would lose to Ray Robinson. Ike Williams would lose to Jimmy Carter. Willie Pep would lose to Sandy Sadler. But Archie Moore would also take on Yvonne Durrell. Fought him December 10th, 1958, Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Durrell dropped Moore. First round up into the 9th round. This was probably the signature performance of Archie Moore's career. Because Archie Moore was down and out in that first round. And how he would get up boggles the mind. I had the privilege of asking Archie Moore about that fight. And one of the things he told me was that his mother, Willie Moore, told him something. And she quoted something to him. And he would carry that for the rest of his life. He said when he was on that canvas, that quote came back to him. And the quote was, when a task is one began, never leave it until it's done. If the labor is great or small, do it well or not at all. And that was a touching moment. Because he said that's what got him through. Now in 1955, when he took on Rocky Marciano, which was the same year that he took on Olsen, Rocky Marciano had a record of 48-0 with 42 knockouts. Fought him Wednesday, September 21st, 1955 in New York Yankee Stadium. For the NBA Heavyweight Championship bout, it was scheduled for 15 rounds. And Archie Moore would drop Rocky Marciano in the first round. A beautiful dewdrop. It's an old saying for a specific move. Marciano would get up. And the referee was Harry Kessler. And Archie Moore felt as though they were trying to do a job on him. They were taking time to get Archie Moore to the corner and Rocky Marciano get his head cleared. Well, Marciano would wind up stopping Archie Moore 9 rounds. But in doing so, Archie Moore would get up, he would go down, he would get up. He would pull against the ropes. And it took everything that Rocky Marciano had to finally get Harry Kessler to stop the contest. Archie Moore didn't beat the count. 1960, the NBA would strip Archie Moore of his light heavyweight championship title. He did not defend it in the states that honored that fight. 1962, the New York SAC would strip Archie Moore for his title for lack of title defenses. 1961, Harold Johnson would defeat Jesse Baldry and stop him in 9 rounds. And that was for the New York SAC. In 1962, Harold Johnson would take on Doug Jones. So actually, when he fought Doug Jones, that was for the New York SAC. When he fought Jesse Baldry, it was for the NBA. Just want to make that clear. And so that's how Harold Johnson became the light heavyweight champion. But Harold Johnson will lose his title May 28th, 1962. Las Vegas, Nevada, to Willie Pastrano. He had a record of 54-10 by this time in his career. Harold Johnson I had the pleasure of meeting as well. He had a son who was a barber who used to come to my house. And I had so many conversations with Harold Johnson. He told me about all the great fighters during his era, about the Philadelphia fighters and venues. I would see him in the gyms in Philadelphia as well, just sitting around at that point in time of his life. But he was something else. Archie Moore would take on Muhammad Ali, who had a record of 15-0 with 12 knockouts, November 15th, 1962, in Los Angeles, California. And what happened in that situation was that Archie Moore tried to discipline Muhammad Ali. And Ali wouldn't listen to him. He said, "I'm not doing it." Now, Archie Moore knew something about that because, see, Archie Moore would quote when he was going to stop a man. He would talk a lot of jive, as Ali did. So you couldn't pull the wool over Archie Moore's eyes. So when Ali said, "I'm not doing this," Archie Moore, who was going to hand Ali the broom, threw it down and said, "Let's have at it." Because Ali said something that was very disrespectful to Archie Moore. He said, "I'll beat you like you're my granddaddy." He said, "You're old enough to be my granddaddy." That Ali was something else, man. So Archie Moore would take on Big Boy Hughes, who had a record of 77 total bouts, 50 wins, 19 losses, 19 knockouts, and he would stop 13 times. He fought him August 22nd, 1943, at Lanes Field in San Diego. He would take on Freddie Dixon and Charlie Burley, Eddie Booker for the California State Middleweight Championship title, Jack Chase and Turkey Thompson, Johnny Bandit Romero, who was a southpaw in San Diego. He would fight him 3 times, defeated him and knocked him out twice, and lost to him once. Archie Moore would take on Shorty Hughes, who was the brother of Big Boy Hughes, December 21st, 1939, San Diego, California. He would lose to him in 6 rounds. January 31st, 1941, the Coliseum in San Diego. He would lose to him in 10 rounds. On October 30th, 1942, the Coliseum in San Diego. He would stop him in 2 rounds. They would lose 10 rounds to Little Tiger Aaron Wade, August 16th, 1943. He would take on Teddy Urarth and Freddie Dixon. Eddie Booker, February 21st, 1942, January 21st, 1944, the Coliseum in San Diego. 12-round decision, 8-round technical knockout. It was for the USA, California State Middleweight Championship title. Eddie Booker had a record of 79 total bouts, 66 wins, 5 losses, 34 knockouts, and 8 draws. He would fight Jack Chase 5 separate occasions. November 26, 1943, May 8, 1943, August 2nd, 1943, November 6, 1946, and March 18, 1947. He would take on Johnny Bandit Romero, who had a record of 194 fights, 139 wins, 47 losses, and 90 knockouts. He would take on Turkey Thompson, Lloyd Marshall, Eddie Booker, and a fighter by the name of the Big Boy Hughes, is what I call him. Now, Lloyd Marshall would face Archie Moore May 21st, 1945, June 26, 1945, March 6, 1944, Eddie Booker. And Eddie Booker would wind up retiring due to eye injuries. He would have a detached retina. Archie Moore would take on Charlie Burley, April 21st, 1944. He dropped Moore 4 times at the Legion Stadium in Hollywood. Moore would take on Coco Kid, September 17th, 1945. He would defeat him in Baltimore Coliseum. He would take on Holman Williams, October 22nd, 1945, at the Baltimore Coliseum, and he would lose that fight. Moore would take on Alabama Kid, Charlie Doc Williams, Bob Baker, Burt Whitehouse, Nino Valdez and Carl Bobo Olson, Frank Buford and Clarence Henry, Bob Dunlap and Leonard Dunlap, Jimmy Sladd, Alabama Kid. Archie Moore was something else. Lloyd Marshall 2 times, May 21st, 1945, June 26, 1945. Ezra Charles 3 times, 1946, 47, and 48. Charles would win all 3 bouts. Alabama Kid twice, January 10th, 1949, March 4th, 1949. Archie Moore would win twice. Harold Johnson 5 times. Moore would win 4. and Johnson would win 1. Between 1949 and 1954. Charlie Burley 3 times. Charlie Burley twice. April 19th, 1948. December 6th, 1949. He would take on Jimmy Bivens 5 times. Moore would win 4. And he would lose once to Jimmy Bivens. Between 1945 and 1951. He would take on Burt Littell 2 times. July 14th, 1947. January 31st, 1950. Jack Chase 6 times. Moore would win 4. And he would draw 1 with him and lose 1 with Jack Chase. Between 1942 and 1947. Now, what's interesting about Black Murder's role? Holman Williams versus Coco Kidd 14 times. Kidd would win 9 times and Williams would win 3. And it would be 2 draws. Charlie Burley would take on Holman Williams 7 times. Williams would win 3. Burley would win 3. And it would be 1 draw. It was 1-no contest and they would change it into a draw. And Holman Williams would take on Jose Basora 6 times. Williams would win 2. Basora would win 3 and 1 draw. I'm going to do a part 2 to this video because I want to break down a few more stats and show you some articles on Archie Moore. I'm Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. All great fights and all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. Shout out to Archie Moore and Howard Johnson, who's also on this list. Look out for the next video, part 2 of Archie Moore. What a fighter he was.